Ashes of the Last Dragon, Chapter 3, Following the Ashes. Outside, High Mill's market had grown more crowded in his brief absence, a flurry of hushed bargaining and guarded glances. Vendors hawked their wares with little enthusiasm, their voices subdued. Children gathered by a small fountain, but their giggles were subdued, fleeting. Now and then, a stray cough would make people recoil, as though the sound itself could carry death. As Cole threaded his way past stalls of onions, root vegetables and stale bread, he overheard more snippets of anxious conversation.
The stranger was definitely heading for Oaksford, wasn't he?
Aye, said something about seeing those ashes for himself. But who'd want to chase that kind of misery?
Desperate times, maybe. Or a fool's errand.
Cole's pulse pounded. Each rumour only tightened the knot of fear coiled in his stomach. He forced himself to move faster, ignoring the uncertain stares. Lily was foremost in his mind. Every second counted. Following the shopkeeper's directions led him beyond the main bustle of the market, past a series of small, crowded huts whose inhabitants peered out at him. After 2 more turns, he finally came upon the alchemist's domain, a squat, stone structure with an uneven roof and a lean-to at its side packed with stacked firewood. Thin threads of greenish smoke curled from a crooked chimney, adding a sharp, herbal tang to the air. Cole rapped on the heavy wooden door, tension clawing at him. If the man inside could not help Lily, he didn't know where else to turn. It swung open, revealing a wiry man with ink-stained fingertips, his apron pockets stuffed with dried leaves, small tools, and vials of unknown substances. His eyes, sharp and assessing, flicked over Cole in an instant.
You're here about medicine, I presume?
Cole nodded.
My sister is gravely ill. The usual herbs didn't help.
The alchemist gestured him inside, glancing around as though wary of eavesdroppers. The interior was cramped, dominated by a large work table strewn with pestles, mortars, and half-labeled jars of powders. Shelves covered every wall, filled with coils of dried roots, bundles of twigs, and the occasional bottled specimen in murky liquid. A pungent odour hovered in the air, part rot, part spice, part unknown.
I can mix something stronger,
the alchemist said, waving Cole over to a rickety stool.
It's not a guaranteed cure, but some families say it eases the symptoms, buys time at least.
A flicker of something like compassion crossed his face.
I won't lie to you. This plague is beyond anything I've seen, but I'm no monster. If you can cover my cost for ingredients, we'll try.
Cole let out the breath he'd been holding.
I have coins,
he said, pulling out the meager handful he'd earned at Fallow's General Goods.
And a bit more if needed. Just, please.
The alchemist nodded and returned to his work table, already gathering leaves of varying shapes, powdered minerals, and a flask of thick, amber liquid.
We'll sort out the final payment once I see how much of each reagent is required.
He paused to toss a suspicious glance at Cole's anxious stance.
It'll take an hour or 2, maybe more, to get the proportions right and let them steep. Best if you come back later, rather than watch me fuss over the brew.
Cole swallowed, dismayed by the delay but unsurprised.
All right, but please be quick. She's alone.
The alchemist gave a curt nod, already crushing some leafy stems in a mortar.
I've heard the rumours too. Oaksford's pyres, falling ash. This plague's unpredictable. All I can offer is a fighting chance.
A fighting chance is all she needs,
Cole repeated, more to reassure himself than the alchemist. He trudged back outside. The midday sun felt almost oppressive, as though the sky weighed heavy with judgment. He drew in a shaky breath, trying to calm the swirl of terror in his gut. Lily's time was slipping away, yet he had no choice but to wait. As he turned to leave, Cole's gaze drifted toward the distant tree line beyond the village. A faint haze seemed to hover above it, too thick and dark to be normal morning mist. His thoughts shot back to the rumours about Oaksford, the talk of a stranger chasing drifting ash, and the shopkeeper's mention of how the ashes had begun some months ago, not necessarily from mere funeral pyres. His eyes narrowed, catching what looked like a thin column of ash or smoke rising among the dense canopy. It was strangely localized, not dispersed like typical bonfire smoke. A slow chill crept up his spine. If there was any truth to the notion that these ashes might be linked to the plague in a deeper way, then ignoring that clue could cost Lily her life. At odds with himself, Cole weighed the options. He needed to stay near the alchemist to retrieve Lily's remedy as soon as it was ready. But the man had told him to return in a couple of hours. If that strange haze in the woods offered answers, maybe it was worth a quick investigation. The memory of Lily's pale face bobbed in his mind. She's counting on me. If these ashes were more than just burned corpses, if they heralded some grim truth behind the disease, then perhaps knowledge could help him fight it. The time spent might lead to answers no one else had. He steeled himself.
I'll be back soon.
He murmured, nodding at the alchemist's chimney as though the man could hear him through the walls. Tightening his cloak, he headed toward the forest at a brisk walk. The acrid smell on the breeze grew stronger the closer he got to the tree line, stirring unease in his gut.
Cole stood at the edge of High Mill, gazing down the winding path that vanished into a wall of towering pines. A faint haze clung to the tree line, visible even in the early afternoon light. Though the villagers insisted this forest was best avoided, Cole's decision was made. The alchemist needed time, 2 hours, perhaps more, to brew the stronger remedy for Lily. Every fiber of his being urged him to stay close so he could race home with the cure. But that distant plume of ash called to him, and a quiet intuition insisted he might learn something vital if he simply followed it. He tightened his grip on his father's hammer, its worn wooden handle smooth against his palm. The hammer's head bore tiny nicks, remnants of years spent in the forge. Even in the open air, the faint smell of iron and soot lingered on the metal. As a boy, he'd watched his father use it to shape farm tools and horseshoes with calm mastery. Now, it served as his sole defense, and a cherished memento of all he had lost. Beyond the outskirts of High Mill, the land sloped gently downward. Dry grass gave way to scattered thickets until the main dirt track dissolved into a tangle of roots and underbrush. Before him, ancient pines and oaks formed a dark canopy that seemed to blot out the sky in places. A hush settled in the air, broken only by the occasional call of a distant bird. Cole paused to take stock of his surroundings. A faint breeze ruffled his cloak, carrying with it a whiff of something acrid, like burnt embers. He wasn't certain if the smell came from Oaksford's pyres, rumoured to be somewhere east, or from the mysterious source of ashes he'd noticed earlier. Regardless, he steeled himself and stepped under the shadowy boughs, each footfall stirring the thick carpet of pine needles.